Hi, welcome to another installment of Informative Speeches by John Rubel. Do you remember the Etch-a-Sketch toy? Maybe you had one when you were a kid, probably got it as a present or something, and you played with it for a while, and then it probably ended up in the bottom of a toy box somewhere until your parents sold it at a garage sale. Well, some of you might know, or you might have heard, or you might have even seen that there's people that actually draw real pictures on an Etch-a-Sketch. I happen to be one of those people. Here's a few examples of some of the things I like to draw. I mainly do landscapes, wildlife. Now, I would love to take the time to show you exactly how I do this, but each of these drawings took me about 5 to 8 hours to complete, so we really don't have time for that. But there's a second aspect to this that may interest you, and that is, what do you do with one of these after you finish drawing on it? Because as you might remember, with the Etch-a-Sketch, whatever you draw on it is easily erased when you turn it upside down and shake it. And then your masterpiece is erased. But I happen to have come up with a way to preserve these drawings so that when you shake them, nothing happens. Now, I'd like to show you how I do that. And some of you may be thinking, I can't draw, or even if you can draw, you're probably not going to take the time 5 to 8 hours to draw a picture on an Etch-a-Sketch and then preserve it. And that may be true. But I'm willing to bet that everybody that's ever played with one of these has wondered what's inside of there, how does it work? So as I explain to you how I preserve these, we'll take a look at the mechanism and the way that these things draw and erase. So there's a few basic components to the Etch-a-Sketch. It's basically a box with a frame around it. This black part here that you see here is the main box, and then the red part is the frame, as kind of a cover on the box. And you have the drawing screen is just a piece of glass. The drawing mechanism is a stylus that rides on rods that are driven by pulleys that work when you turn the knobs. But the most important thing about the Etch-a-Sketch is what's inside of it, and that's aluminum powder and teeny tiny little plastic beads. The aluminum powder sticks to the screen and pretty much everything else, and the little beads agitate the aluminum powder, and that's what erases the screen. So, we'll talk about how I preserve these. It's not easy. In fact, me and my father invented a special tool to open up this box. What we did was we modified a circular saw. We mounted kind of a makeshift table on it. What I do with that is I push the Etch-a-Sketch along this table, and the saw blade cuts just deep enough to separate the frame and the main part of the box. And once I do that, it's time to start opening it up. This part's pretty easy. The knobs pop right off. I use a pair of needle nose pliers. Pop the knobs off like so. And then you're ready to start dismantling it. You can see the red frame then, after it's cut, lifts right off. Now here's where it starts to get tricky. You have to remove this glass screen. The glass screen's put in there with sort of a putty, a sticky material that keeps it stuck to the main box. So what I do is I take a utility knife and I cut that gooey putty along the edge of the glass. Sometimes you have to run through there a couple of times to make sure that you have a good separation. And it kind of is suctioned down, so after you make this cut, you have to try to pry the glass out without breaking it. This is probably the most critical point. So what I do is I kind of try to work the razor knife blade under the glass, and I pry just a little bit, and you'll be able to see that the putty starts to kind of separate. And then I take a screwdriver or a chisel or a putty knife or whatever I have around that's flat and work it and carefully pry the glass out. Once I have it, it pretty much just starts to lift right out. Now at that point, you want to be very careful with this, because on one side is the aluminum powder and the other side is just the plain glass. So you want to set this aside somewhere face down and don't touch it. Put it somewhere safe where you're not going to knock it over. Now we have it open and you can see, hopefully, this is the rods I was talking about, the stylus. The knobs you can see turn through this pulley system. So the next thing I do is I cut these wires so that I can take this whole contraption out. And once that's all done, it's time to clean this thing up. So what I like to do, I actually need to give you a word of caution here. Don't ever try this at home. The aluminum powder gets on everything. If you were going to do it, I would recommend wearing gloves or a dust mask. You probably don't want to breathe this stuff in. Making saw contraptions isn't really a good idea either, so it's not really the safest thing. And I've always just wanted to tell somebody don't try this at home, so hopefully you'll take that advice. So the next thing I do to get rid of the beads and the aluminum powder is I place the whole thing in a good plastic bag, close it up, and kind of try to hold on to the thing and shake it as hard as I can to get as many of the beads and the powder out. The powder never comes all the way out. So the next thing I do is just get dishwashing soap, plenty of it. I like to use an old toothbrush or a scrubby pad, and I just scrub it and wash it until all the aluminum powder's off of it. And once I've done that and it's really super clean, I put it back together, which is pretty simple. I just take the glass that I took out, put it back in, make sure that I'm putting it in right side up, and so that the picture also was right side up. Now the putty that glues this thing in here is pretty sticky still, so usually you can press carefully, making sure you don't break the glass, and that'll stay put. Then you can pop this back on the frame. The knobs kind of help hold it together. You can probably see that I have the aluminum powder on my fingers already just from that little bit. Gets it everywhere, so you have to really clean it up. So after that, I take painter's tape, because when I cut this, it left kind of a gap here, and this isn't on really good anymore. So I mask this all off with the masking tape, and then I use a two-part epoxy. I like to use PC7. It's pretty easy to work with. And I just fill in that void and make sure that it's pressed tight, that it sets up. You can clean it up, and if it looks a little discolored, you can color it in. Sometimes I'll hit it with a magic marker or some paint or something. And like this example, you really can't tell that anything's ever been done with it. And then it's preserved. So you can display it or do whatever. Sometimes I try to sell these, so just a note, if you're interested in buying one of these, you can contact me at jjrjr148@yahoo.com. Thanks for letting me share this strange talent with you, and hopefully you came away from this with childhood curiosity satisfied. Good evening.